It's taken me over 20 years to convince the National Institute of Health that our community is worth studying. What I used to get from them was, oh, this is a very small population, they don't really matter.
What made you want to tackle the people inside of Lebanon in your research?
As a sociologist, I'm very well aware that the way in which a country is structured shapes the ways in which people have relationships. I mean, in Lebanon, they're very resilient. They adapt amazingly well to the challenges that they're facing. A lot of research that's been done to tell us how to live the best quality of life with Alzheimer's.
Do you think that there's kind of this stigma where if my mom has Alzheimer's, I wouldn't tell other people about it?
Usually families just hide them in the house and they don't take them out anymore. And they'd say, do you want to embarrass me? It's really bad.
Can you plan for it?
Yeah, you can definitely plan for it. And that's why it's so important to...
What are you hoping to find while conducting research about Alzheimer's in the Arab American community?
That's a great question.
Before we start today's episode, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your day and giving this podcast to listen. And I also wanted to remind you that the only way this podcast will ever grow is with your support and with your help. So subscribe to the podcast, like this video, and now let's get the show started.
Welcome aboard Middle East Airlines.
والمتوجهة إلى
طيران الشرق الأوسط يرحب
مدينة القدس العربية.
Dr. Kristine, welcome.
Thank you, Jaffer.
Thank you for coming. Dr. Kristine, I want you to tell me about what you do every day, like what do you specialize in, all of this stuff. But before that a little bit, I want you to tell me if you were to do some self-reflection, and self-reflection in its most physical form is looking in the mirror. When you look in the mirror, who do you see?
Who do I see? I see that I am my father's daughter. I see a lot of my father and myself when I look in the mirror. It reminds me a lot of how, actually I was just thinking about this morning. My father used to look at me when I was a little girl and say, we belong to the Mutual Admiration Society.
What does that mean?
And I didn't know what it meant when I was little, but I said to him, what does that mean? And he said, it means when we would look at each other, we're admiring each other. We both think highly of one another. And so it always reminds me of my dad, actually, when I look in the mirror,
Really?
Interestingly. Even though I'm probably a combo, looks-wise, of my mom and dad,
Yeah.
I see more of my dad.
He had a big influence on you?
He did.
Growing up?
He did. He had a very big influence on me growing up. He was, and it's interesting, too, because he was born in Iran, and he immigrated here when he was in his mid-30s. He had left Iran as a young man of 18, seeking higher education in France.
Yeah.
Actually, he was on the Shah's blacklist.
Really?
Yeah, because he was a communist, my father. So he left. He basically had to leave Iran. And when he left Iran, he went to Paris to go to medical school at the Sorbonne. And after he finished medical school, he came to Michigan for a residency exchange program at the University of Michigan. And that's when he met my mom. And my mom was the daughter of Lebanese immigrants. And so I grew up actually identifying more with the Lebanese side of my ancestry than the Iranian side, even though I was very close to my father, because my father always kept an arm's length distance from his Iranian identity. So when I would always ask him questions, he would privilege his sort of experience in France over his experience in Iran.
Did he kind of push that away a little bit?
The
Iranian side?
Yeah, he pushed it away a lot. But as he got older, like in his later 60s, he passed away when he was 70.
Allah yarhamu.
Thank you. He started to reconnect with his Iranian identity, and he actually, by that time I was married, and he came over one day with a Persian cookbook, and he said to me, do you think you can cook some of these dishes, one day for me? And I said, sure. I never grew up eating Persian food. I didn't know how to cook it, but I knew how to follow a recipe. So I would make him some of the dishes.
What do you think made him kind of try to reconnect with that identity?
I don't know. I don't know if it was nostalgia. I think as we get older, we tend to reflect a lot on what happened before in our lives. and maybe we, start to identify the good parts of our earlier years. And I think he had some really good years growing up in Iran.
Yeah.
And I think he missed the food, and he missed the feeling of being there. He would talk about being in the village and having the fresh fruit picked from the tree. This he talked about as he got older. When we were younger, he never mentioned Iran.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's perfect, because my follow-up question was, how did you end up here, or your family end up here? And you just explained that to me. Now tell me about what you do on a day-to-day basis. Like, what do you specialize in?
Okay. Well, I am a sociologist, a professor of sociology. I actually came to this profession in a very long and winding road kind of path. I didn't know that's what I wanted to do when I was younger. I knew, actually, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a doctor because my dad was a doctor. But then I saw the movie All That Jazz. I don't know if you know it. It's
Not
a movie
really.
from the 70s, way before you were born. And they showed open heart surgery on the screen, and I just about died when I saw that. Like just the cutting of the body, and they would crank it open like they use this. I don't know if they do this anymore, but back then they would open your chest with a metal machine, and then they showed the heart and all the blood. And I thought and my father had always told me, well, if you want to be a doctor, it doesn't matter what kind of doctor you want to be. You have to go through all the rotations. You have to learn everything.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I could never do that. So I knew I would never be a medical doctor. So I went to college thinking, well, I'm just going to explore what it is that I like. And I still in my undergrad years, didn't find anything that I had a passion for. But people kept telling me, well, what are you majoring in? What are you going to do when you graduate from college? And so I had a lot of friends who were majoring in business, so I just decided to go into business.
Yeah.
Marketing, advertising, and public relations. The last year in that program, I realized I would never work in the field.
Last year.
Yeah, and so it was too late to change.
Yeah.
So I just finished it up. And then I was married at the time, and so then I had my first child. And I was very bored at home, and I was trying to look for maybe some part-time work in public relations, but it was all very corporate, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. So my husband encouraged me to go back to school. He knew that I'd always wanted to do more education. So I went back, and I studied communications, because I was trying to think, well, for those of you who are familiar with the business degree, you can go into finance, you can go into accounting, management. I chose advertising and public relations, and I was trying to figure out why did I gravitate towards that, and I realized I really liked communications. I liked the idea of being able to learn how to effectively communicate with people. So I went back and did a master's in communication studies, which is where I learned that communications was an offshoot of sociology, but sociology was much broader. Communications is very narrow. And so that's how I got to sociology. I actually had an opportunity to teach an undergraduate course when I was doing my master's at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I just fell in love with it. Like the idea of seeing students have a light bulb go off in their head when you were explaining something new to them that you thought was very important really attracted me.
What's the one thing that usually let that light bulb flash? Like one piece of information that usually impressed the people that were listening?
It was like learning different concepts. As a matter of fact, the one key one when I was in my master's was the concept of cognitive dissonance, which is when people don't realize that the way in which they're understanding a word or a situation is related to their past experiences. And so when I was able to illustrate that through examples, I can't even remember what example I used at the time, and the student said, oh, now I get it. I thought, gosh, this is so cool.
So basically, for me to learn something new, it depends on what I've been through before in the past?
Well, it does depend on that, because everything that you're exposed to that's new is understood through your categories of knowing, what you already know.
Right.
And so any new stimuli or any new experience that you have, you're always understanding it based on what you've known before.
So me and you learning something new, you would understand it one way and I could understand it another way, because we've had different upbringings and different experiences.
Exactly. And that's why communication is so hard, right? Because we all come to a situation with a really clear understanding in our mind of how things are and how the world is.
Yeah.
But somebody else has a very different understanding of it. And then you try to negotiate those understandings to create a shared reality.
That's very interesting. I was taking a look on so you've done a lot of research since you graduated, but there was something very interesting, and that you focused a lot about the research in Lebanon. And here I just wrote down like a few, just like three of the research. One was social relations in Lebanon, the other was aging in Lebanon, and then another one was stress, social relations, and psychological health in Lebanon. What made you want to, and especially now that you said that you're not, both of your parents are Lebanese and your mom is descendant of Lebanese immigrants, what made you want to tackle the people inside of Lebanon in your research?
That's a great question. Well, I didn't tell you my husband is Lebanese. He was born in Lebanon and came to the United States when he was 13 years old in 1970. And I think there's something about coming to the U.S. at that age, when you're 13. He had a very, very strong connection still to Lebanon, even though he came here with his family at the age of 13. And when he turned 18, he started returning to Lebanon on an annual basis just to visit his home country. He had no parents there, no siblings there, but he had a very strong love and attachment to the country. So when we got married, he started taking me there every year. That was the first time I'd ever gone. But we would go every year, and sometimes twice a year. And it actually culminated in me spending a year there through a Fulbright award that I received in 2008.
What's the Fulbright Award?
The Fulbright Award is a program that the U.S. government has with different countries around the world, where scholars get an award to spend a year in another country to teach and do research. And they also bring other scholars from other parts of the world to the U.S. to teach and do research. And the idea is to promote understanding, to facilitate relationships between scholars who are doing different kinds of research in different parts of the world. And so I had applied to do one in Lebanon since we were going every year, and I thought, gosh, it would be so cool to do research here. So I applied for the Fulbright, and I got it, and we spent a year there. It was a little less than a year. It was a whole semester plus the summer. And that's how I got interested and had an opportunity to begin really thinking about doing research on Lebanon.
What was like your first impression seeing the people of Lebanon? Because the average person living in Lebanon is different than the average person living here. So what was your first impression as someone that was just introduced to the Lebanese people?
Well, the first time I went was in 1987.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The middle of the Civil War still.
Yeah.
It was very shocking, actually, to see the conditions under which people live, and to be honest, under which they continue to live even 30 years after the Civil War, or maybe it's been
a little over that
40
too.
years. Yeah, the fact that people don't have electricity for 24 hours, 7 days a week is mind-boggling to me. I mean, in Lebanon, they're a very resilient population. They adapt amazingly well to the challenges that they're facing that change on I don't know if you'd say on a monthly basis, on an annual basis. So I was more, I think, in shock over the conditions that people were living in, because I was basically put into the middle of a war zone. The people were very warm and welcoming and patient, with the fact that my Arabic at that time especially was very, very minimal. But I did learn French from my father. And so a lot of, as you may know, in Lebanon, French education is very highly valued. And back then in the 1980s, it was privileged over English. Yeah. Right. So I could communicate with a lot of people in French, actually, not so much in Arabic. it was just an amazing experience to be welcomed by people who, I never met before, who were experiencing war, but at the same time were so giving. And they were happy, actually. Like, people were not sad or upset. They were just making the best out of their situation.
And that's the adaptation that you were talking about.
That's the adaptation, yeah.
What was the first thing that you wanted to tackle from a research perspective? What aspect of life did you want to tackle as soon as you got there?
My area, my very deep interest in research has to do with social relationships, which is, I think, why I was drawn to communications. I was really, really intrigued by the ways in which people had relationships with one another. Because, in Lebanon, when you greet somebody, it's not just, hi, how are you? There's like a very elaborate ritual that you go through. It's you ask them how they are multiple times using different words before you actually even start talking about anything. And I was also very intrigued by driving in Lebanon. A lot of people, especially immigrants, I find, immigrants from Lebanon who come to the U.S., let's say at a young age, and then they go back to Lebanon and they have to drive in Lebanon, they're so frustrated and they just don't even like to drive there. I found it liberating.
Really?
I love driving in Lebanon.
Really?
And I realized that it really is, in my mind, a metaphor for the kinds of relationships, not the kinds of relationships, but the ways in which relationships are forged in Lebanon.
Please explain that to me.
So
because it's chaotic. Like I drive there, and I learned how to drive there, actually. It's very chaotic, very. It's
chaotic, but there is a kind of structure to it. I mean, in Lebanon, you are just constantly negotiating the road. So to give you an example, here I can drive from my house to my work, which takes about a half hour, and not even remember the drive.
Right.
It's sort of automatic pilot. You're just driving. You don't have to pay attention to what's going on around you. I mean, you do, but you don't. Yeah. You can go for miles without even
Your muscle
remembering.
memory will take you there.
Exactly. In Lebanon, you cannot do that.
That's true.
You have to pay attention constantly. And what I love about it is that, if you need to get in somewhere and you're in a hurry and you just sort of let the other driver know you need to do that, they let you in.
Yeah.
Even if you're cutting them off, no one gets upset. It's like, it's amazing. Or like, let's say you went on, you took the wrong exit and you need to get back on the freeway. I've backed up on the ramp and just got back onto the freeway.
No questions asked.
No questions asked. And people let you through. Like, if they see you're backing up, they'll move.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. So I found it very liberating. And I do think that driving in Lebanon is kind of like a metaphor for social relations there, because I feel like the relationships that you have in Lebanon are constantly negotiated. I mean, you can't assume that the way that your relationship was the last time you saw someone is going to be the same when you see them again. You have to build it. You constantly are working on it.
Yeah.
And you're building it, and you're rebuilding it, and you're taking it in different directions.
That's actually so interesting, because when you say that, I think about when I moved here, and I can have one of my closest friends and then not talk to them for a while, but because we're both so busy with work that we kind of understand that when we see each other, and I really don't have to like overwork that relationship. But in Lebanon, when I was there, I'm just realizing this now, that I was always reaching out to my friends and always trying to see them, and constantly like, hey, when are we going to meet?
Yeah.
When are we going to do this?
Yeah, it's very different. Another thing I love about driving, let me just say one more thing, is that if you have to cross the street and you're a pedestrian, all you have to do is look at the driver and let them know that you put your little foot out just a little bit, so they know, and they'll stop and they'll let you go. I just love that.
You don't look like the type of person that would enjoy driving there. When's the last time you went?
I was there this past summer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You drove this past summer too?
Yeah, I drive every year. I drive every year.
What else did you find worth noting from doing research in Lebanon about the people of Lebanon?
I think in Lebanon, the one paper you mentioned about the stress, social relations,
That's what I
and
want to ask you
psychological
about,
health, that paper was actually really illuminating for me in terms of understanding the nature of relationships in Lebanon, because what we found, in general, what we know from research is that social relations can be a very powerful resource to help people cope with hardships. And I had expected that in Lebanon, because it is a very social country, I mean, social in the sense that when I think about the U.S., we spend most of our time working and we sort of fit social things in around our work schedule.
Absolutely.
In Lebanon, you work because you have to. You fit it into your social schedule, but it's the social life that sort of takes precedence and takes priority, right? So I was expecting from my research in Lebanon that in Lebanon people were going to report really large networks that were really close, and that that were going to be an enormous, like the larger and the more support people reported, the better off they were going to be. But that's not what I found. What I found was that actually in Lebanon, on average, people's social networks are smaller than what we find in the United States. And when I say social networks, we collect information about people's social networks by asking them, think about people who are so close to you and so important that you can't imagine living life without them.
Right.
And then they tell you who those people are. And then you ask them for a second layer of social relationships. Okay, how about people who maybe aren't that close but are still close and important? And then the third layer, okay, people you haven't yet mentioned but are close enough and important enough they should be in your network. For the Lebanese, they tended to definitely have more people in the inner circle, just like we find in the U.S. That's not different. But the total number of people they mentioned was about, let's see, I think in Lebanon it was about 6 people on average they mentioned.
Really?
That were close and important to them. In the U.S., it was 9 people. I'm talking about average person in Metro Detroit, I should say.
Isn't that weird, because what you just explained, that like the social life there is very important to them?
Yeah. It's very surprising.
Do we know why that's the case or no?
I think I think another thing I think about social relations in Lebanon is even though they have a very high level of warmth to them that you feel when you're interacting with people, social relations tend to be much more instrumentally motivated than they are emotionally motivated.
What's instrumentally motivated?
You have relationships with people in Lebanon because you need people there to survive.
Absolutely.
Literally need people there to survive. There's no government safety net.
Yeah.
Especially when we think about older adults, the idea of having Social Security and Medicare is reserved for a very small number of people who maybe had a position in the government. Maybe they worked in the military. Yeah. But you don't have the universal support like you do in the U.S. As a result, you really need people to survive. You can't count on the government to provide for you. So relationships are facilitated and motivated by the fact that you need these people in order to survive. And I think that means the people that you end up identifying as close and important are very few and far between, because those are the people you can count on to actually help you survive. Right. Whereas in the U.S., social relations are much more emotionally motivated. We identify people that we really feel there's a connection to. It doesn't matter if we don't think about them as, well, that's someone I know who can help me out during a rough time.
Right. And do you think that the research conducted in Lebanon would be different in other Arab countries, or do you think that you not generalize it, but kind of include other Arabs with
that's hard for me to say, because I haven't looked into what the way in which those countries are structured. I mean, I think social relationships, as a sociologist, I'm very well aware that the way in which a country is structured shapes the ways in which people have relationships. Right. So for example, I don't know, for example, in Jordan, do they have a good welfare state system where people know that they can count on the government for help?
Yeah.
If not, I would hypothesize that it would be very similar to Lebanon.
Yeah. One thing that I want to ask you too is Lebanon's pretty divided. Like you have a section within Beirut that is predominantly Sunni Muslim, and then another one that's predominantly Shia Muslim, and then you have Christians and a lot of different sects.
Yeah.
How do you get to include everyone in the research?
We did that research. You mean in Lebanon?
Yeah.
Yeah, we worked with a data collection firm at the time, Information International it was called. I don't know if it still exists. And basically we relied on them to do representative sampling. So we met with them and we talked about the areas that they would go to because it is a very segregated city in terms of religion. And we wanted to make sure we included all the religious, the diversity, the religious diversity of the Metro Beirut area. And so they identified the different areas, and when, they had to get permission to enter some areas. Yeah. But we did get a good diversity of different religions.
Okay. And across the board, was it pretty similar? The people's answers and what you were looking for?
I did not do analysis by religion yet. I think about religion in Lebanon as a kind of stratifying force more than a cultural force. Yeah. I think, the history in Lebanon tells us that depending on what religion you're part of, you've had a very different history, which has led to different opportunities and different challenges. And that's been very much guided by your religious affiliation. So I think about religion more as an indicator of inequalities than I do as something that would indicate a cultural difference. Even though I think inequality and culture are linked, I look at it first and foremost as an indicator of inequalities.
One thing that I think about a lot when I think about the people there and even the people here and Arabs in general is PTSD and effect that PTSD has on their day-to-day life. And it's like you mentioned when we first started talking that they kind of adapt to every situation that they're in, but the people there have been in constant hardship for over the 30 years since even before you stepped there. But so I think about it as if the people there are simmering on low heat PTSD, and that's just kind of how they live their life. So did you see that?
One of the things that I think we need to pay attention to when it comes to measuring or understanding psychological health in Lebanon, or even among those of Lebanese or Arab ancestry who are in the U.S., I think the manifestations of psychological health are often different for that population than they are for the general U.S. public. I think there tends to be a lot of I'm not going to say this word right, somatization. In other words, they usually describe their psychological pain through physical indications of not feeling well. And I think we need to come up with a better way. I don't do research on PTSD in this population. I know that some people, Ibrahim Kira is one of the researchers who does research PTSD in individuals who've come to the U.S. from the Arab world. It's hard to know. It's hard to know what kind of psychological issues people are experiencing. In the study that you're mentioning that I did do on psychological health, we used an indicator of depressive symptoms to measure psychological health. And what we found is that there was a high level of depressive symptoms, and that we looked to see to what extent it was predicted by different political instabilities. Like what did you find most stressful? Was it the Lebanese Civil War? Was it the events that happened in March in 2008? Was it something else? And then those who experienced, who said those things were more stressful had worse psychological health. But what was interesting is that social relations came in to buffer that effect. In other words, help people only when there's like a sweet spot for social relations. It can't be too strong and it can't be too weak. It has to be somewhere in the middle. Which is also very interesting and counterintuitive. Like I said, I would have thought among Lebanese, the more social support you have, the better you are.
Yeah, so basically more social support does not basically translate to better psychological health. There is a sweet spot there.
Correct. You got to have that balanced social support.
A lot of your research always, in general, now moving a little bit away from Lebanon, it talks about aging a lot, you know? And it's very interesting because, of course, everyone wants to kind of negate the effects of aging, and that's difficult. What are some of the best anti-aging practices that we can, we can apply? Yeah, we can adopt to our lives.
I think of aging as a lifelong kind of process. We're aging from the minute we're born. We oftentimes tend to think about it as something we pay attention to as we get older, like the later part of our lives, like 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. But because we're aging from the minute that we're born, we need to pay attention to our health from the minute that we're born, which means the way that we eat, the ways in which we have physical exercise, the ways in which we interact with other people. Social relations are also very important for good aging.
Well, how so though?
I think you mean social relations?
Yeah, because that's interesting, because I think that's what people think about right away when they think about the anti-aging remedies and stuff. You always talk about better sleep. You always talk about staying hydrated, maybe applying products to your face, and eating better food. But I don't think we talk about the social relation aspect of aging.
Yeah, you're right. We really don't. I mean, social relations are increasingly being identified as extremely important for ensuring we have a good aging experience, because by staying connected to people and not isolating ourselves, we actually stay young. Our thinking stays young. Our activities stay young. I don't want to sound ageist here, because I think getting older is a beautiful thing. And when I say stay young, I mean it keeps us active.
Yeah.
In a way that I think is very important for maximizing quality of life. I mean, one of the things that I'd like to see minimized is, as we get older, this mentality that, oh, well, I'm old now, I can't do this, or I'm old now and I can't do that. There's no reason why you can't do anything.
Yeah.
You should keep doing anything that you think brings you joy or brings you pleasure or allows you to stay connected with people.
That is a big problem. Like that's what my parents say. Like, oh, I'm too old for this now.
Yeah.
And it's something that's kind of simple, like simple activities. And be like, no, we're getting old. But it is frustrating to see that. Yeah,
and it's not good. It's not good for older adults to take that approach, because it does tend to hasten the kind of physical aging that doesn't have to happen.
What about now that you were mentioning social relations and aging? I'm starting to think about the stuff that keeps us happy, and the opposite of that is the stuff that makes us sad, and that's holding grudges on other people. And this person did me wrong 10 years ago. I'm still holding that in my heart. That has to have an effect on my aging. Is that correct, or am I?
I mean, it's always, it's funny, because I've done research on forgiveness and humility also, and the findings are mixed, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's not always. It's not always evident that letting go of something that caused you harm or that hurt you is necessarily good for you. And the reason why we think that is because holding on to it allows you to protect yourself from it happening again.
Okay.
So it's not that you don't necessarily forgive that person, but you shouldn't forget that it happened. Because you need to protect yourself from it ever happening again.
From your research, is there a way which, like, a best way to forgive somebody?
Is there a best way to forgive somebody?
Yeah.
You know, forgiveness is a concept that really means putting yourself in the person who did you wrong, putting yourself in their shoes,
Yeah.
and trying to understand why they did what they did. And when you do that, it helps you to come to terms more with the harm that was inflicted onto you. But you shouldn't forget that happened, but you should try to understand it, and that helps you to forgive that person.
Throughout your research, like when you are researching this stuff, do you personally, as Kristine, find it difficult to forgive people?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, it depends on what was done to me. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's easy to talk about it, but to actually do it, it's not easy. I mean, and that's why you have to really reflect on it, right? You have to think about, okay, let me try, and I've been trying to do this more and more as I've gotten older, try to understand why it is that person did what they did. What is their mindset? What were they thinking? You know, what were they experiencing that led them to do this? And that actually helps a lot, but it takes work and it takes effort. You have to be self-reflective.
What other areas do you specialize in when it comes to your research? Like, what other things do you look into?
You know, most recently I've transitioned to the area of understanding social aspects related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. I got really interested in that actually because of my late father-in-law, Allah yarhamu, who passed away a few years ago. But when he was an immigrant from Lebanon, and when he got dementia, it was not, we didn't understand what it was. We didn't know anything about Alzheimer's disease or related dementias. That led to a lot of family conflict, and it led to a lot of not knowing how best to care for him.
Conflict as it pertains to what? How did the conflict arise?
Alzheimer's is a progressive kind of disease. So when somebody begins to show signs of it, they'll the signs of Alzheimer's are like, forgetting things, but not forgetting. People forget things when they're really stressed, but forgetting, for example, the name of somebody that you've known for 20 years.
Yeah.
That's when you know there's a problem. Sometimes with Alzheimer's, there's hallucinations where you think, somebody's after you, or there's thieves around who are taking things from you. But then you'll snap back.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you'll carry on as if there's no problem. So there's it's a transition, and it gets worse with time. And for families who are going through it at first, oftentimes there's a lot of denial. And if there is a problem of the parent or the spouse or whoever it is that's forgetting, they oftentimes think maybe they're doing it on purpose because they're just trying to,
get attention
or give me a hard time. And then as things get worse, because nobody ever wants to plan for it, because it's a very difficult thing to come to terms with.
Can you plan for it?
Yeah, you can definitely plan for it. And that's why it's so important to, if you think that you may have dementia or someone in your family may have dementia, you need to go see a doctor immediately. There's no cure for dementia yet. There's no cure, or I should say there's no cure for Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is one kind of dementia.
Yes.
There's no cure for Alzheimer's. And so if you get it identified early on, you can plan for it. There's a lot of research that's been done to tell us how to live the best quality of life with Alzheimer's.
Really?
Yeah.
Even while the person is forgetting and hallucinating, maybe they can still live a good quality of life. How so?
Definitely. Well, first of all, understanding what Alzheimer's. So if you have a family member who has Alzheimer's, you want to understand what it is from the very beginning. And there's communication strategies you can adopt to help minimize frustrations between you and the person who has Alzheimer's. There's ways in which you can set up your house so that the person living with Alzheimer's doesn't get agitated, and you want to protect them from like going outside and wandering and never coming home again. There's things you can do in terms of activities to make sure that the person with Alzheimer's is engaged, because as I said, social relations are still really important for Alzheimer's. You want to keep them as engaged as possible. There's just things that you learn, like you shouldn't talk about the person in front of them as if they're not there, because that creates tension and agitation and anger on the part of the person with Alzheimer's.
Oh, so the person would know. Okay, so let's say our mom has Alzheimer's, and me and you are talking about her
In front of her.
and I'm telling you,
As
like,
if
man,
she's not there.
She has Alzheimer's. She's doing this, this, and that. So that's what you're saying. People should avoid.
Well, I think if you want to talk about that, just include her in the conversation.
Okay.
And don't make it seem like you don't think she's not there or that she doesn't understand. Or let's say you're talking with me or your siblings about taking care of your mom, and someone needs to stay with her, and you're arguing over whose turn it is to stay with her. You don't want to do that in front of your mom.
Yeah.
Because she even if she doesn't understand what you're saying, she feels the argument and the tension.
And you said we can plan for it. Is there ways that we can prevent it from even happening?
Well, we do know prevention is a strong word. We can reduce our risk.
Yeah.
We know that from research. And basically, the ways we can reduce our risk are the same kinds of activities that we adopt for having good health in general. So eating well. And oftentimes we privilege what we call a Mediterranean diet, which is a diet that's very common to people from, the Mediterranean part of the world, right? So for Lebanese, it's not a hard adaptation, but we want to do it in a healthy way, and we have to eat in moderation. So that's a really important factor. Again, staying physically active, and which is why I say as we get older, don't think you're too old to be physically active.
Yeah.
You still need to move around, even if it's walking around the block. You start out doing something, and gradually, you can increase your physical activity. It doesn't mean you have to join a gym, but you just have to do things to stay active. Staying socially engaged as an older adult, don't lock yourself in your home and say, "Oh, I just don't feel like seeing people anymore," which sometimes happens as we get older.
Yeah.
Stay engaged, and stay engaged with people who are not your family, because family is just too easy. By too easy, I mean it doesn't challenge you that much. You already have a very well-formed understanding of one another. It doesn't challenge your mind that much. You're usually on the same wavelength. So keep connections with friends. Keep connections with people that you don't see that often.
You're talking more about stimulating the brain for new things.
Exactly. But one of the reasons, we know this in general, but what we don't really know is that when it comes to the Arab and Middle Eastern population, is there something unique about our culture or about our practices that are really beneficial to help us reduce our risk? Is there something unique that's putting us at risk?
I mean, you just said that, mentioned earlier, that how much social relations are important to us.
Yeah.
So that is something that's kind of built into the culture that's already there, right?
It is. But I think we don't really yet know what the nuances are about those social relations. Just like I mentioned to you, I was really surprised to discover that the average number of people in a person's network in Lebanon was so much smaller than what you find on average in the U.S. Is that true among those of us who are living in the U.S. as well? Do we mirror the kinds of social networks that we were finding in Lebanon, or is it different because we're living in the U.S.?
Yeah.
And are our habits different because we're living in the U.S.? Middle Eastern and Arab Americans are unfortunately not really well represented in research studies. They could be in research studies that have been carried out in the past, but we wouldn't know because they're legally considered white.
Right.
There's no checkbox
for
Arab American or Middle Eastern American. That's why I think we really need to have studies that focus explicitly on this population, so that there's so much money being poured into research that's meant to improve people's health, and we should have those resources being poured into our community as well.
What are you hoping to find while conducting research about Alzheimer's in the Arab American community?
I currently have a study that's in the field right now, and it's very challenging because we're taking an approach where we're trying to find Arab Americans and Middle Eastern Americans who are representative of all of us living in this area. So it's not just me going to a mosque or going to a social service agency and saying, hey, I'm doing this project, anyone interested? It's actually sending letters randomly to households, figuring out if anyone who lives in that house qualifies. And then if they qualify, we invite them to be part of the study. So when we find somebody who's Middle Eastern or Arab American and age 65 and older, it's like finding gold.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they're so valuable and they can't be replaced. So anyone who's identified, you know, we really need them to say, okay, yes, I'll do this study. And it may not benefit that person or their family today or tomorrow, but in the coming months, in the coming years, what we find from this research can have enormous benefit for our community. It can help identify programs and policies that are going to enhance the health of our community.
Has that happened in other communities?
Definitely.
What was the findings really?
Definitely.
Like what could help?
For example, if you, I'm going to start out with just thinking about prevalence levels of Alzheimer's and related dementias. We know that in the general U.S. population, I think the prevalence level is about 10%. For
Really?
adults 65 and older.
Really?
Yeah, 10%. For African Americans, Black Americans, the prevalence level is closer to 13%. For Latinos and Hispanics, the prevalence level is closer to 15%. What is it for Arab Americans and Middle Easterners?
We don't know.
We don't know because we don't have the data. So this, this project that I'm doing, I want to be able to say what the prevalence is so we can even know what the problem is. You need to know what the problem is first. Once you identify the problem, you can begin to think about programs that can support healthy aging. So for example, in African American communities, one of the things we've learned is that churches are a very important resource for the community. So there's been a lot of effort to bolster the ability of churches to be able to promote healthy activities, to be able to draw people in so that they have more opportunities to engage with one another. I mean, we could get that kind of support for our community as well if we can show that there is a need, that we have challenges. But it's not just challenges. I think I'm interested to find out, what are our strengths? What can we do? What do we have that's already happening in our community that can be identified to make sure it keeps happening and to increase as needed? We've talked about social relations, right? Is there a sweet spot when it comes to social relations?
Yeah.
You know, do we have to be very aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it in terms of social engagement? You know, for example, if we just, maybe we'll find out that if we just socialize with our family, even though that's a necessary thing that we need to do, maybe it's not the ideal. Maybe we need to also work on helping our community. So family's a strength, but maybe we need to use those family connections to start reaching out beyond family.
Right.
So that we can have more diverse interactions. Let me, I'm really, this is reminding me of a conversation I had with an older adult when I was doing a study about 20 years ago. And she was an immigrant from Palestine. And she said to me, one of the hardest things about being in America is that when I was in Palestine, I used to just go to my neighbor and have a cup of coffee. She said, here, I don't have a neighbor that I can go over and have a cup of coffee with. I'm just with my kids. And I love my kids, don't get me wrong, but I miss the opportunities that I had to really have connections with people who were not necessarily my family. She didn't say it in that way, but she missed just having that sort of easily accessible social interaction.
Yeah.
That's so hard to do here because, not that she doesn't have friends, but they don't live, she was in a village before, but she didn't live close to any of her friends. So it wasn't easy to just, walk on over and have a cup of coffee.
And that's so interesting, and that's so sad to hear. Like, I know that's how it kind of is, and I'm just curious to know, through your research so far, do you think that there's kind of this stigma where if my mom has Alzheimer's, I wouldn't tell other people about it?
That's a huge problem we have, actually. And what ends up happening is that if you think your mom has Alzheimer's or your dad has Alzheimer's, usually families just hide them in the house and they don't take them out anymore, and they don't talk about it. And as I said, it's a progressive disease. When you're caring for somebody who has Alzheimer's, it's going to get harder. And Alzheimer's isn't one of those diseases where, it just takes a few months and then the person is gone. This disease lasts anywhere, someone can live with it anywhere from 4 years to 20 years.
Wow.
And as it progresses, it gets worse. And families who are caring for someone living with Alzheimer's, they can't do it by themselves. They will, you need help. You shouldn't think that it's something that you should bear on your own. You need help when it comes to this, and understanding what the resources are. That's another, I'm hoping, positive outcome from the research that we'll do, as we'll figure out how to develop support systems that are acceptable to the community, that meet the community's cultural needs, where they feel that they can use these resources in a way that is good for their parent or their spouse and is also good for them. I mean, one of the best things you can do when you're caring for someone is get some respite, meaning get a break. Don't do it 24/7, because your health will deteriorate. And if your health deteriorates, there's no one left to help care for your parent or your spouse.
That's very interesting. And I think for the most part in our community, putting your parent in nursing homes is kind of taboo.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking about all the people that don't want people to know that their mother or father have Alzheimer's, that are going to nursing homes to maybe put them there. Or do we have some sort of information about that too? Or
information about what?
If it's happening, like...
I don't, if the people are putting their parents in nursing homes, that I don't know. I don't know if that's happening. I do know that people are hiding the fact that their family member has Alzheimer's. It's a hush-hush kind of thing. And the reason why I know that is because a couple of years ago, I was working with the Alzheimer's Association and Access to modify an existing intervention that's meant to support family members who are caring for someone with Alzheimer's. And in order to modify it, we needed to have people try it. Like I needed to know if the modification worked. So we had to recruit families who were caring for someone with Alzheimer's to come through the program. It was a 3-week program. Access actually is still offering it. It's a great program for anyone who's caring for someone living with Alzheimer's. This program is an important resource that gives you information about Alzheimer's and gives you the strategies that you need in order to effectively care for someone living with Alzheimer's. So we were trying to recruit people to come to it, and we were hoping we'd recruit a lot of people from Access, actually. And we had 5 people trained from Access who were going to give the program, and they were coming into contact with families who were living with Alzheimer's. So they would tell them about the program, and they'd say, "Do you want to embarrass me? I can't come into a group of people and say that my mom has Alzheimer's or that my husband has Alzheimer's." It was so hard to get people to participate. We finally did get 58 people to participate, and they were from 29 families. So we had at least 2 people. One of our requirements is you had to bring at least another family member with you, because we know from past research that if only one person comes and they come back with the information, everyone's just like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. But if you get 2 people from the family who are telling you, no, this is the way it should be, it's much more helpful. And interesting, what we found is if we just made the request that you need to bring another family member, it gave them permission to tell another family member, listen, I need someone else to come with me, and they would come. We ended up getting 58 people, 29 families, and what we found at the end of the study, we did an assessment before they went through the program where we asked them about family conflict, we asked them about caregiver burden, we asked them about their knowledge about Alzheimer's, and they went through the program, and then a week later we asked them the same thing. Overall, everybody's care burden went down, and it went down dramatically. Like it was on average, people who, it didn't go down for people who said they had low burden, but for people who said they had high burden, by the time they ended the program, it diminished to the level of low. And so to me, that
What made it go down that much?
I think it is the information that they receive and the support that they got. For 3 weeks, they would come for 2 hours. They would talk with other people about what they were going through. They would get the information about what is Alzheimer's disease, what should you expect, what are effective ways to communicate with that person, why you should get respite, you should get a break.
Yeah.
What about difficulties with showering or bathing? All kinds of really useful tidbits that just help them deal with the situation. And also, they learned they weren't alone. I mean, there's other families going through this. And that whole process of getting the information, of learning there were other people who were going through this with them, I think resulted in just a lower feeling of burden. And by the way, caregiving satisfaction went up too.
Wow.
They felt more satisfied with their caregiving.
Knowing what you know now about Alzheimer's and all this information that you're telling me about, what are some things that you would have suggested your family do with your father-in-law that would have made the process so much easier?
Yeah. First thing I would have suggested is that we need to contact the Alzheimer's Association and we go through that Living with Alzheimer's intervention program. That would have helped enormously. And I would have also suggested that more than one family member attend, as many as possible, minimum 2, because not only does it mean everyone's on the same page, but, and I'm sure you've experienced this even if you've been in a class, you get something from what you're listening to and you understand something, and someone else who's next to you will get different information.
Right.
They're both equally important, but the more ears you have to listen to the same information, the more information you get. So, I mean, that would have been the number one thing that I did. And, I don't advocate nursing home placement at all. I don't think that's always the answer. I think when you're living with Alzheimer's, as a matter of fact, keeping your environment as familiar as possible is the best thing to do. But you do need to get support. You can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
You need, and whether that support is people coming into your home, even having a place where you feel comfortable taking your spouse or your parent for a few hours just to give them some social engagement. That's sort of geared towards stimulating the person living with Alzheimer's with activities that they're comfortable with. Maybe playing backgammon. Which isn't a usual game that you find in the U.S. society, but if it's something geared towards Middle Eastern or Arab Americans, we can have culturally appropriate activities that are comfortable, that are familiar, and that really help people stay connected.
That's so interesting because I still don't understand what about the Alzheimer's is so bad that I wouldn't tell another person that my mom is going through it.
Well, you know Arabic, right?
Right.
Do you know what the Arabic word is for dementia?
I know it's a very aggressive word that they use.
It's a very negative. It's experienced negatively.
dementia عم بهلوس.
خرف.
خرف. Right. عم بخرف.
Yeah, that word is the word for dementia. I mean, it's like the clinical word for dementia, but the way it's used in the Arabic language, it's to basically dismiss somebody or to put them down or to make fun of them. So I think it comes from language. Language is very powerful. Language shapes our perception. And so, there's like a kind of embarrassment. You don't want somebody to say that about your parent or about your spouse. It not only puts the person down, but I think it reflects on the family in a negative way. But we need to get past that. I mean, one of the things besides all this research that we've talked about, I also co-direct a center that's funded by the National Institute of Health. It's called the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease. It's housed at the University of Michigan, but we engage with the Arab American and Middle Eastern community in Southeast Michigan, and what we do is we bring information and resources about Alzheimer's to the community. We have different events every month.
Do people attend these events?
People attend the events. We have, before COVID, we used to have anywhere from 50 to 100 people attend. Post-COVID, we get about 30 to 40 people to attend. I think people haven't come out as much yet. But basically, we bring information about, how to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's. If you're caregiving for someone with Alzheimer's, what are the best strategies you can use? How can you plan for Alzheimer's if you get the diagnosis? We have multiple topics that we'll talk about. We have one series where we've had a primary care physician, a neurologist, and a social worker on a panel, and each give just a 5-minute little overview of how they deal with someone who's having Alzheimer's. But the best part of these events is that most of it is Q&A.
Yeah.
So we've got like a little bit of a presentation, but then people can ask their questions.
What's the number one asked question?
The number one asked question is that people want to know what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. And I would say after that is how can we stop ourselves from getting it?
Yeah.
Those are the number one questions. And then for people who are living with it, meaning they're caring for someone with Alzheimer's, they ask about sometimes if they have a specific challenge they're dealing with, they ask about it. Or they ask... I would say they ask about specific challenges. But the center is also not just bringing, and so I feel like we're making some inroads in combating the stigma, because when we would do it in Arabic, we couldn't even say the word kharaf.
Yeah.
Because people would just uproar. Why are you saying that? I object to that. That's a very derogatory word.
Is that the direct translation to it?
For dementia. So then we started saying the symptoms of dementia in Arabic. I can't remember what that word is right now, what that phrase is. And we would say Alzheimer's, and then that's a more acceptable word. But I feel we've made a lot of inroads. As a matter of fact, we now call our events Alzheimer's awareness events. We never directly called them that in the beginning. We would call it community coffee time.
Yeah.
Just to bring people out.
I would have never thought that was the case with the people that have Alzheimer's in that community. I would have never thought that it was that bad.
It's really bad. The stigma is really bad. And not only that, but people's dealing with the caring, I think they always feel they're under a microscope. Are they being a good enough child? Are they being a good enough spouse?
A lot of they judge themselves maybe a lot.
Yeah.
What can I do? I'm 25 years old. My mom and my dad have not hit that 65-year-old mark that you're looking for. But what are some things that I can do, or someone else that's listening do, to help in this research?
With this research? I think one of the biggest challenges we're facing is oftentimes we'll go to a house and let's say we find someone who qualifies. And I want to tell you how much effort it takes to find someone who qualifies, because we're sending letters randomly. We're sending our interviewers out who are bilingual. They're knocking on doors, and people are scared to open their doors, first of all.
Absolutely.
People are afraid of scams.
That. Of course.
They're afraid of scams, and they don't know why someone's coming to their door. I think also because of the geopolitical situation that we're living through right now with what's happening in the Middle East, people are also afraid about, is the government coming to knock on my door? Why is someone knocking on my door?
Right.
So I would, one of the things you can do is that if someone knocks on your door and you don't want to answer it, we'll leave behind a card that says, "Sorry, we missed you." And it has a University of Michigan logo on it. Call the number, because they can just screen you over the phone to see if you qualify. And if you do qualify, please say yes. I've had a lot of cases where an older adult will say yes, but then they'll tell their son or their daughter, "Oh, someone from the University of Michigan came and they want me to be in the study." And the son or daughter will tell them, "No, don't do it, Mom. Don't do it." Not because they don't see the value in it. They don't understand. I think they're trying to protect their parent, and I don't think they know. They think their parent understands what it is, and they're trying to protect their parent from a scam. So if you're a daughter or a son of somebody who's been invited to be in the project, please encourage them to participate, because if what we learn about your parent is not only going to help your parent eventually, but it's going to help you.
Absolutely.
And it's going to help your kids. It's only through research that we can address the challenge, understand how best to address the challenges with Alzheimer's. I mean, if we don't have research in our community, then we don't know what the challenges are. We don't know what the strengths are. We don't know what we can do to best help.
Have you been working on this for a long time?
Yes, we have been. We were supposed to start this project in April of 2020. We got shut down because of COVID. We finally were able to start up again in June of 2023. So we've been in the field for about 6 or 7 months now. We've collected data from 88 people, but we need 600.
Oh.
And we're falling short, not because we're not finding the people. We're going through all this effort to find the people. When we do find the people, they just won't say yes. And I think in our culture too, it's hard to say no. They'll say, well, I can't do it now. Why don't you call me on Wednesday? And then maybe we'll set up an appointment. And then our interviewers call and then they don't answer. Or our interviewers go to the door and they don't answer the door after that. So it's so frustrating.
It's so frustrating, and I can see why people would get scared if someone knocks on their door, because they're going to be scared of all these things that you said, and saying no is just a safe answer.
Exactly.
To like, nothing changes in my life. No, if it's good, how good can it be? And if it's bad, I just got rid of it.
Exactly. That's exactly the challenge. That's exactly the challenge. And, I made reference. I've talked to some community members about what I'm doing, and they say, well, this is not a good time. We're all concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. And my answer to that is, it's because of what's happening in the Middle East that now more than ever, our community needs to be counted.
Is this the first time research has been done specifically to the Arab American Middle Eastern community?
It's not the first time, but what it is the first time for is doing research in a way that takes a scientific approach to represent the entire population. So I'm not just focusing on Dearborn. I'm going to houses in the rest of Wayne County, in Oakland County, and in Macomb County, because our population is very diverse. And we want to be able to say something meaningful about all of us who come from that part of the world.
Absolutely.
Not just people who live in Dearborn, or not just people who go to, one mosque or another, or who go to one church or another. We're including everyone.
And these letters are just being sent at random? At
random. We've got the list of houses from the United States Postal Office. We don't even know who lives there. We just send it, and it says, "Dear neighbor." We don't even address it to anyone yet, because we don't know who lives there.
Yeah.
And then we're screening, meaning we're asking, one of our interviewers comes, they ask 3 questions. They ask who lives in the household, and the reason why we have to ask who lives in the household is because we randomly pick someone from the household. If there's 2 people who are more than 65 and older, we randomly pick one of them. So we ask who lives in the household, we ask how old those people are, and then we ask their ethnicity. And Middle Eastern Arab American is one of the choices. Yeah. And so if they're 65 or older and they're Middle Eastern or Arab American, they qualify.
That's it.
Yeah. But we're facing those challenges. So I actually am curious to know, what do you think we can do to help people feel more comfortable with the fact that someone's coming to knock on the door? And not only that, but they're asking them to participate in a project. Like, I'm trying to figure out what it is I can say or do that can help people feel more comfortable with it.
I feel like the knocking on the door is what gets me.
It's
I put myself in that situation.
Yeah.
And prior to talking to you, if someone knocked on my door
that you didn't know,
that I didn't know, I would just automatically say no to whatever they're trying to tell me.
Yeah.
I think that's personally, that's what that gets me. Like, I was thinking about maybe if anyone's hearing with someone that's 65 or older that can reach out, because now you just explained all these beautiful benefits to the research and how important it is. I feel like a lot of people would want to reach out, but now I understand that you want it to be at random, and someone reaching out wouldn't.
But if anyone who's listening got a letter, or got one of our "Sorry We Missed You" cards, please call.
Yeah, because that's definitely something that
means you might qualify.
Yeah.
And the more people we can get, the closer we get to the 600, the better data we have, which means we can say much more with more confidence what our community is going through. So if I just stick with the 88 that I have now, but I'm hoping we get a lot more, that'll tell us something.
Of course.
But not as much as if we get the 600.
And another thing that I think is very important to mention is, you already told me this, but the information is very private. and
It's confident.
Yeah, very confidential.
Thank you for mentioning. Yeah, I don't think I had a chance to say
Yeah.
that. Yeah, anything that's shared with us is confidential. I mean, we go through a very rigorous review process with our institutional review board at the University of Michigan. We guarantee confidentiality. As a matter of fact, the National Institute of Health, which is funding this study, gives us a certificate of confidentiality, which means that even if somebody from outside, from the government came and said, I need to know if this person's in your study, we do not have to tell them anything. We are immune from having to report the identity of anybody. Everything's anonymous and confidential. And one last point I will say is that it's taken me over 20 years to convince the National Institute of Health that our community is worth studying. I've been submitting applications for 20 years, and what I used to get from them was, oh, this is a very small population. They don't really matter. Why should we invest all this money to study this population? They're insignificant. I finally made a convincing argument that said, no, this population is significant, and there's a lot to be learned about this population that will not only benefit this population, but will probably benefit a lot of people. I think we have a lot of strengths, and learning what works for us can work for other people too.
You're very passionate about this community, really.
Yeah. I mean, I do believe in it. I think it's the only way that we can really help. I think research is the source of very important information that can only help us. And so if our community doesn't participate in research, we just miss out on so much.
What's one thing that we didn't mention today that you think we should have? I think we talked about so much. I think just one more last thing I would say about what we talked about today. I think aging is such a beautiful thing, and I think most of us try to escape aging. We think that getting older is something we should sort of shy away from, and nobody ever thinks they're going to get old. They think that they're going to stay young forever, but aging is a privilege, and I think learning how to age in the best way possible is something we should all be committed to, and we can do that through research and making sure that our community is represented in research. What are some findings that you've had personally as Kristine that you found beautiful about getting older and growing and just becoming older?
I think as we get older, we first of all get a lot more confidence about who we are, and we feel more comfortable in our own skin, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I think we accumulate life experiences that help us deal with the challenges that life brings, because living is not easy. I think our life, life in general, just being human, is a challenge. And the longer we live, the more that we see that everything's going to be okay. Yeah. And I think, especially for the younger generation, having older people in their lives gives them a real sense of security and confidence, and also I think hope for the future, because they see that my parents or my grandparents made it, they went through life, I can do it too.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That is really beautiful, but I'm just curious too, what would have you told your 20-year-old self with the information that you know now about everything?
Oh my gosh, at 20 I was so ageist. I wanted nothing to do with aging. I mean, I think I would have told my 20-year-old self exactly what I'm saying now, that
Really?
aging is a privilege.
Yeah.
That if you're lucky enough to grow older, you want to do it in a way that's going to be the best quality of life possible. And so you need to start from now. Don't wait until you're old to think about aging. Yeah. Recognize that you're aging from the minute that you enter this earth.
And start prepping for it.
Exactly. Start prepping for it. I mean, you can't escape it. You cannot escape it. So you need to embrace it and make the best of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Kristine. This was very insightful. And I really hope that people who've received the letters listen to this and help, because it looks like you still have quite a bit to go in the research.
We
like
do.
You still need 520 people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that the young people who listen to this will encourage, if their parent or grandparent tells them that they've been invited to be part of a study at the University of Michigan, that the young people will take, if you're worried, take the time, and I don't blame you for being worried, but take the time out to learn what it is before you tell them don't do it.
Absolutely.
Because there's so many benefits for not just the older adults, but their families and for our communities.
Okay. And I'll mention your contact information, all this stuff, just in case maybe someone received the letter, threw it out, just realized, wants to reach out back to you.
Sure.
So all this will be available. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
It was
you.
a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.